that was striking to me when I first heard that. You are dealing here in areas which are in reality life and death decisions for the empires, and you cannot go to court and sue Helmut Schmidt for doing that or sue Herrhausen for doing that. But you need to have an executive action on these things, and this is what we are looking at with these murders.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to Dr. Ola Tunander and Dirk Polmann. Dr. Tunander is an emeritus professor of the Norwegian Peace Research Institute Oslo, and Mr. Polmann is a German author and documentary filmmaker. I've talked to both of them separately before, but tonight we want to do a panel on the political murders in Europe throughout the Cold War and into the Unipolar Moment, when people who worked for peace and a political rapprochement with the East and the Global South just died. Ola, Dirk, welcome back.
Yes. Yeah, no, we had in Sweden we had a talk in last year, and about these political murders and about Palme, particularly Olof Palme, the Swedish prime minister, who was shot on the street, and I realized that Sweden have had actually 3 significant people on the international scene, and that was Bernadotte, who was the first dealing with the Palestine-Israel issue, and he represented the UN, and he divided the territory between the Palestinians and the Israelis more or less equal. And then the second person was Dag Hammarskjöld, who was a general secretary of the United Nations, and he was shot in Ndola, on the border between Congo and Rhodesia at the time, North Rhodesia. And then it was Olof Palme. So every Swedish leader actually that have had some significance on the global scene has been shot. And that is, not what you learn in political science, so to speak. It's if you are a little bit critical, you are actually shot. And then I thought, you look at others, Aldo Moro, for example. I mean, this is the obvious case, Kennedy, and so on. So it's they were all shot. And then you try to figure out who is organizing this, and you see that there is a system, so to speak. It is a number of it is the same people, more or less, in all these murders. Charles de Gaulle they tried to kill also,
A lot of people died and were attacked, but the danger we are running is that we might start seeing patterns where just the hand of coincidence is working. Actually, Edward Snowden warned of that recently. But very importantly, Dirk, in our last conversation, pointed out, look, if all of the coincidences fall into the same category, then it ceases being a coincidence. And Dirk, can you maybe add which other names that you think we should add to this pool of Europeans who just ended up dead and cutting short all of these efforts toward reconciliation?
Yes, I think we should definitely have a short conversation on Enrico Mattei. We stopped with that on our conversation, and I think for me it was striking how much this case resembles Herrhausen. It's very, very similar in the structure, and it's correct if you say, and there's also Aldo Moro we have to talk about. There's another connection there. And there are several. I think we should talk about the patterns because, for example, I can see I would add another case, and that is Helmut Schmidt, who was not killed, but he was taken out of his job as Chancellor of Germany in the Parliament. And that has a strong resemblance to what happened with Alfred Herrhausen and with Enrico Mattei, because all of them were starting to deal biggest time really, with the Soviet Union on oil and gas. So that is another instance. And regarding the danger of conspiracy theories, yes, that's always the case, but we are reminded very often, nobody has to think that this will go unnoticed if it could be close to a conspiracy, but rather the opposite, that it's not a conspiracy theory, but that it's necessary to understand that there's a structure, is also important, that we don't forget that. So it's not Scylla, it's Scylla and Charybdis. We have to steer between these two dangers.
Absolutely. Ola, so when you look at these three Swedes who died, and also the other political deaths, and maybe also the sabotages, who do you think needs to be pointed out the most in order to understand the level at which these political murders impacted the continent?
I think that you have to go to, for example, you had this British MI5 guy, Peter Wright, who wrote a book that was that Margaret Thatcher tried to stop, actually, and this was a book that brought up the killing, or the preparations for killings that were done at the CIA at the time. That he visited Angleton, the head of counter-espionage, and Bill Harvey at the Langley at the CIA. And what they were preoccupied was to get a pool of assassins. That was their focus. And Peter Wright said that we don't do it any longer in Britain, which was probably not true, but still, that was what he wrote. That is what he had said, and but he proposed the French, also the French wise, you could say, because they were very much into assassinations, and they had tried to kill de Gaulle a couple of times, and the same people were actually involved in the Kennedy case. So it was one of the top assassins in against de Gaulle that happened to be in Dallas the same day as Kennedy was shot in Dallas, and he was they put him on an airplane to Mexico City afterwards, and and which made de Gaulle not to go to Mexico City, because he was invited to go to Mexico City, and he canceled his trip because this well, I forgot the name now. He was going to Mexico City, and de Gaulle didn't want to be in the same city, even though Mexico City is a pretty big city.
I would like to add there that de Gaulle himself had noticed the similarity. He was giving a very interesting short talk on the Kennedy murder, and it's very concise, it's very precise, and he says there that it's the same people. And he describes that they took this communist Lee Harvey Oswald, who was a communist and was not a communist. And he describes the whole scene, what we consider now a conspiracy theory. If you go to Wikipedia, he describes that. That is in a book from Alain Perifit, that was his media manager, which has never been translated from French to another language. But it was David Talbot wrote an article about that and quoted it. That is very interesting. So de Gaulle himself had the same opinion, that the people who killed Kennedy were the ones that were trying to kill him. And there's another instance which leads us astray now in a way, but also not, because it's very interesting that while de Gaulle wanted to talk with Adenauer about the possibility of a European combined defense policy where the Germans would have access to French nuclear weapons. At the same time, Reinhard Gehlen, the chief of BND at the time, who was really an American asset. The BND was just renamed from the Gehlen Org of the CIA into BND. They just switched the names. So he was hiding the attempted murders who were sentenced to death in France of de Gaulle, 2 generals, Raoul Salan, I forgot the other name. They were hiding in a German paratrooper caserne near the talks, and Gehlen made sure that that de Gaulle got to know about it. So it was for de Gaulle, it was not clear if Adenauer was behind that, or if somebody was trying to sabotage the talks, which is probably the case. So you see, this all leads one to it. It's connected and not connected, but it is connected that this can be used in secret policies.
And I need to add that Ola just wrote, actually published a four-part series on the murder of Olof Palme, and actually in the 4th part you also describe how some of these people were very overtly threatened. You described the scene where I think it was Dag Hammarskjöld, not Olof Palme, but who was invited to Israel and was forced to sit right next to an assassin, right? Can you describe that scene maybe?
Yeah. No, that's, I mean, first I heard it from a Swedish ambassador to Israel, actually. And then I read it in I think it was I've forgotten the name, a professor in Uppsala who had written a book that brought it up. But the point was that Dag Hammarskjöld, I think it was in 1958, was invited to David Ben-Gurion and to his, what you could call the summer house or whatever. And then he was placed to a man that he didn't know who it was, and at the dinner table. And then he asked his assistant afterwards, General Horn, I think, and he said, this man was Joshua Cohen. This was the guy who held the gun to shoot Folke Bernadotte, also the former Swedish UN representative. Yeah. So the Ben-Gurion just told Hammarskjöld that if you do something against us, you will have the same. You will also be shot, actually.
Folke Bernadotte was shot by this person, by this Israeli terrorist, who was recognized as such. Okay, what was he? Sorry. What was the guy?
No, he was he was an Israeli terrorist and belonged to the Shamir group, I think, and but he was then
Stern Gang. It was called the Stern Gang.
Yeah, and then he was bodyguard for the prime minister, then David Ben-Gurion. So it's when you speak about terrorists in this case, it goes to the top in that.
Yeah, but I mean, it flows them back to the way that Israel actually used, or not Israel, sorry, how Zionist groups used terrorism already in the 1920s to even murder like British citizens in the Mandate of Palestine. But it all goes then that way. But when we then take that forward,
I think I'd like to add some for the people who are not knowledgeable, because I always notice that when we talk, we assume that people know a lot, and that is that's a mistake. Yeah, if I tell something to my children, they don't know. So, for example, Folke Bernadotte, it's important to understand that he was a member of the royal family in Sweden. So he's very high up in society. And also it's important to know that during World War II, he was the savior of about 20,000 Jews in negotiations with Himmler. This is a story, if you want to look at it on Google or so, the white buses. So he was somebody who had a reputation of saving Jews in World War II. And you have to understand that the people who killed him, this Joshua Cohen, they were a member of, it's called the Stern Gang. There's another name, I'll have to look it up, a Hebrew name, and that was from Yitzhak Shamir, the later president. He was the head of that group.
Letty.
What's that?
Letty, I think.
Yeah, right. So that is one thing. And then, of course, you had Menachem Begin, who was searched by, he was a terrorist who blew up the David, the hotel in I think in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem it was, right? He blew up a hotel and there were about 30 dead, and he was searched by the British as a terrorist for that act. So you have a strong connection. This is not far away. If you compare it, for example, if you say that Yasser Arafat had been a terrorist, then the similarity occurs to you that it depends what perspective you have on it. Terrorists are called terrorists by one side and freedom fighters by the other. And the same applies to Haganah and Irgun and these Jewish groups who were really killing a lot of people. But in these cases that we just mentioned, it's very intertwined. Yeah, this is also why I mentioned de Gaulle and Gehlen. You see that it's part of a deep political structure that is rarely discussed and not many people know. This thing with Bernadotte is, I met nobody who knew that story when I told it to people.
No, and when it comes to Gehlen, for example, I mean, he was a commander, he was a head of intelligence for Eastern Europe, for Adolf Hitler. So he was that until the end of the war, and then he was taken over by CIA and Alan Dulles, and then Alan Dulles made this Gehlen org, which was the CIA organization in West Germany that became the BND, Bundesnachrichtendienst, which was became the West German intelligence organization. And Gehlen, when Alan Dulles, as the head of the CIA, wanted to train Egyptian special forces and so on, he asked Gehlen, and Gehlen recommended Skorzeny. And Otto Skorzeny was the favorite SS officer of Adolf Hitler. And he had a group of 20, 30 people from SS and Wehrmacht that were training the Egyptian and then you could get the impression that the Nazis were standing against the Jews again, so to speak, because the Nazis were training the Egyptian. But actually, Skorzeny became an Israeli agent, a Mossad agent. He was killing people, a rocket scientist, for Mossad. And in the 67 war, he was actually informing the Israelis about all the details about Egypt. So he was, and they had Adriani Monti, there was a go-between, Italian go-between, who was a Israeli agent. And this man, Monti, he became the supposed foreign minister, or the upcoming foreign minister in the coup of Borghese in 1970.
Of where? Foreign minister for?
Borghese. That's another.
Not in government yet. It was a coup attempt in 1970. And they took over the Minister of Interior and so on. And it was, and then Adriani Monti went to Madrid, where Otto Skorzeny was living, and get the green light from Otto Skorzeny to start the coup in Italy. And so Skorzeny at the time was the CIA representative for the CIA in Madrid. So that is you could say it's the same people, and Dirk found some years back in the BND archives, they found a document from the Skorzeny file in the archive, and that document says that two senior Air Force people from the U.S. Air Force generals coming in and saying that Kennedy is unacceptable, and he is weak on the Russians or Soviets, and in principle, it means that you had to take him out. And that was and Skorzeny had a kind of death squad system, executive action capability in Madrid to take out people. And so it's and the same, and using also was the people that Dirk mentioned before, the French also, that were used for trying to kill de Gaulle, and was also present in Dallas in 1963 on the day of the Kennedy murder. They were, and also at Dag Hammarskjöld murder. So it was a group of special forces at the Dag Hammarskjöld. Was a killing of Dag Hammarskjöld on the border to Congo at northern Rhodesia.
May I, Dirk, I will ask you in just a second what you can add to this, but it also must be shared. Hammarskjöld was in a plane crash accident, right? But
yes,
his body was found off the plane and with a bullet in his head. Am I getting that right?
You are getting that right. That is first. I have to say, the plane crash is a very very fishy story. So, for example, just to give you, there were witnesses who said that a small plane attacked the 4-engine plane of Dag Hammarskjöld. All of these witnesses were deleted from the files because they were black. Because they were black Africans, so they were not considered viable as one thing. Then, as a pilot myself, I have a commercial pilot training. I would say when I see the case of what the pilots did, they tried to make an emergency landing with a burning plane. This is officially, it was up that they had a wrong altimeter setting. The altimeters of the plane were sent from the crash site to the United States, to J. Edgar Hoover, to do the investigation. Something similar happened, by the way, to the MH17 in Ukraine, where the flight recorders were sent to Great Britain for investigation. So that's again a pattern where you see things, what the heck is going on there? In the case of Enrico Mattei, who also died in a plane crash, the cockpit of his plane was dissolved in acid. Can you imagine that? That's not a usual method of an airplane in crash investigation. The instruments of the cockpit were dissolved in acid in the Mattei case. So these things show you that you should have a second look at all of these things. And in terms of Dag Hammarskjöld, it was clear that there was one survivor who was in a hospital, and he was so badly treated that he died after 4 or 5 days. He was an American. And it was clear that Hammarskjöld survived because he had earth between his fingers. So he crawled from the wreck, away from the burning wreck. And as you said, but Ulla can say that better, I think, because he knew the Norwegian officer who was part of Hammarskjöld's security team. And he was one of the first, I think the first of non-mercenaries. There were some mercenaries earlier on the crash site, but he was the first of the United Nations troops. And he said also in an interview before his death, but Ulla can tell that he saw a bullet hole in the head of Hammarskjöld, and Hammarskjöld had a ace of spades playing card in his and a scarf, kind of scarf that he had around his neck, which is also a symbol for professional killers usually. That was used in Vietnam by some American troops, but also by the mafia. But Ulla can tell that because he knows all that.
Yeah. No, I knew Björn Egge, and we had dinners together and so on. And we had common friends, and he was the first officer at the crash site, this first UN officer, and he thought it looked like a bullet hole in the forehead, but what he realized was that they actually had the photos that went out. So this was taken away from the photos, so you couldn't see it. So you had photos of the dead body, but it was already manipulated. The photo was manipulated, and he thought that the British were very suspicious. Now also another friend of mine, or he used to come to dinners at the Lund, at our place when I was at university in Lund in 1970, 71 and so. And he became the responsible for the UN investigation when it came to Rhodesia, or former Rhodesia. He was a former minister in Zimbabwe, actually, and he told that in the interview a few years back that it was a clear order from somewhere to the Air Force to shoot down a 4-engine airplane coming in from the north on the very day of the shooting down of the airplane. So it was, in that sense, the Rhodesian Royal Rhodesian Air Force had the order to shoot down the plane, but it may have been another pilot that actually shot it down. There's a lot of claims about that, and one guy, a Belgian mercenary trained in Britain, had said to several people that he was responsible for shooting it down, but he didn't know who was in the plane.
Dag Hammarskjöld at the time was the General Secretary of the UN, and he was working actually on what was he working on? I mean, what was so controversial about him?
I think he was the French. The French wanted him because he spoke fluent French, and the British thought he would be okay, and so that, and the Americans accepted him also. But then he did not take the position of the West against the rest, so to speak. I mean, he was supporting the anti-colonialist struggle in Africa, and he had some tension with Lumumba in Congo, but in general he supported it, and he got also now he was on the way to Katanga to talk with Chombe, who had started his own state of Katanga, and supported by the British and the Belgium, because it was very mineral rich. It was most of the world's uranium, for example. So it was so some people wanted to have control of this area, and of course, if you have a charismatic person as Lumumba, and then you could not accept that he had been in control of the Katanga area, actually.
I think
I mean, it was other things. It was other things also.
Also, yeah, but I think I thought a lot about exactly that question, because it's important to understand why each of these cases that we talk about, what was important enough to kill these people. And Ula has an own very interesting argument about this, why these are executions, really. But first, with Dag Hammarskjöld, it's quite clear. His father was Swedish prime minister. He came again from a very important family. And it was a family that was known for being servants. His mother was a devout Christian and very much interested in justice, also social justice. So that is the background of this person. And they considered Dag Hammarskjöld to be a bureaucrat. That's what a general secretary is, and he would not be dangerous. But it turned out when Dag Hammarskjöld became general secretary, he was very active and very politically active. For example, he invented the blue helmets as a method to have soldiers to stop fighting, to use soldiers as kind of a international police force to stop warring factions. And you also have to understand, at the time that Dag Hammarskjöld was general secretary, when he started, there were exactly 100 nations in the United Nations, and about 50 of them were former colonial states. And he didn't take the position of the superpowers. He was also not loved by the Soviet Union. He did what he was supposed to do. He was, in a way, a person that did not only talk on Sundays about equal rights for all these people, but he was going after that. He was really doing that. And he alienated very much the British and the French. And you could say, in the moment that he was shut down, he was also working on Indonesia, where he wanted Papua New Guinea to become an own state. So it was always give the power to these new state nations and enable them. He was training diplomats, providing diplomats for these countries. It was give them the possibility to govern themselves. So that was the point. That was also going against the interest of Allen Dulles. By the way, not so much against the interest of John F. Kennedy, who collaborated with Dag Hammarskjöld, and he also, John F. Kennedy collaborated with Enrico Mattei, which is a similar case in a way. So there were these anti-colonial ideas that countries should govern themselves. That's Hammarskjöld, that's Kennedy, that's Mattei at that time. And there were the other ones, the Dulles faction. They were, for example, his brother, John Foster Dulles, who was the foreign minister of the United States of that time. Allen Dulles, as CIA chief, was also kind of an extra foreign minister. That's part of the new files that come out. And they were, for example, they made a coup in Guatemala against Arbenz, a Swiss-origin president, social democrat. And the reason was that Arbenz wanted to give some of the area or the rural area to the population so that they could grow their own plants, especially bananas. But it was a United Fruit Company who owned Guatemala. And both Dulles brothers were on the board of directors of the United Fruit Company at the same time. So you see there's this colonial network, and that was what Dag Hammarskjöld was definitely working against. He was somebody who it was clear and he was known worldwide. You could say that in a way Sweden managed to produce these two politicians, Hammarskjöld and Palme, who were not superpower chiefs, but they were in a way moral superpowers in their time. It was Dag Hammarskjöld was I know a person who is called Dag, and the parents called him Dag because of Dag Hammarskjöld, because they admired him so much. Yeah.
Just for context, like when we discuss these cases, I mean, it would be blue-eyed to think that there's all of these intelligence networks who are known to come out. I mean, the CIA came right out of the OSS, right, of a Second World War organization to not only bring in intelligence but also run these covert operations, right? And we know from the way that power works, if you have small groups of people who are ultra violent or willing to use high violence, they are able to get political outcomes. So Ola, do you think what we are looking at here is actually the way that the network of these ultra violent groups that then manage to act, because they're very smart, under the cover of intelligence and in the shadows, and then eliminate certain political players in order to skew the whole system toward what they want? I mean, by just eliminating basically the peace faction of the North America and Europe, whenever that one looked like becoming a bit too strong.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is. I mean, if you look at the Sweden with Olof Palme, who was the head of counterintelligence in Sweden, and who had the close ties to his counterpart, and that is very important. I think you always have the close ties to your counterpart. So Palme had his ties to Angleton in the CIA, who was the head of counterintelligence, and they had ties to the guy called McKay at the MI6, and they said that they believe that Olof Palme was an agent of influence. That's what they argue, and that was the Swedish security service then believed. So that means that you could not have you could not tell the prime minister about secret matters because he was probably an agent of the other side. And the problem, Palme said that the problem we had, it was one social democrat at the security service, and so he was a traitor. He was informing the prime minister. He went to the prime minister and informed him about what we were talking about. And the problem was that the Social Democrats at the time, in the early 70s and so on, they were against the military coup in Greece, and the Social Democrats some of them had to flee the country, and others went to prison and so on. And then they had, and the Swedish security service got the telephone books on these people and reported them back to Greece. So it was, they were, and the same was about the coup in Chile and Argentina and so on. Then the Swedish security service sent the information on these refugees in Sweden and their relatives and so on to the CIA, who sent it further to Chile and Argentina, to the Pinochet. So it was the security service in that sense was on the other side. They were working for the Americans.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I could add another anecdote from Herrhausen to show you, because this is not only small stories.
Herrhausen, the German former chief of the Deutsche Bank, who got murdered in '89. Yeah, and Dirk.
Yes, we had and Ola knows very well about this, but we also have discussed that on our conversation. That is the book that I'm writing with all these cases included. And there was Herrhausen. I tried to describe him as honest, well-willed person, and that there was a story that I got from Norbert Blüm, who was a minister in the German Parliament for labor and other stuff. And he was well known because he was conservative, but he was strictly Christian, and he was very much against the Pinochet government. So the conservatives in Germany usually went hand in hand with the Chilean government. He didn't. He went over there and tried to get a very left-wing German person out of prison, which he managed to do. And that was astonishing to this lady. But what he did, he was sitting there, and the people from the Pinochet government considered Norbert Blüm they knew his opinions, and they positioned him close to the toilet, for example, during the dinner. And he also had a cut-off goat's head in front of his hotel room. That is something medieval, so to speak,
Very
as a gesture. Yeah, very obvious. Yeah, and he was sitting there with Herrhausen, and he noticed that the chief of the Deutsche Bank in Chile was talking to the Chilean interior minister, and he was giving him names of people that should be arrested in Chile because they were left-wing. And Blüm noticed that, and he told that to me personally. So he informed Herrhausen about this and said, and Herrhausen only said, "I'll take care of that." And on the next day, the guy from the Deutsche Bank was fired. He lost his position. And that is not only a proof what kind of person Herrhausen was, but it was also a proof to the other side that he was not a reliable person in the power structure that they had installed, where the Americans and the Chileans, that was one big block. So if you go there and do things like that, they have consequences. They have consequences, and you get marked on a list. And if the list is, there are too many things on that, and they are really important. This was not extremely important. This was just a hint that Herrhausen is from a different faction in these kind of things. And that was the ethical faction that also Norbert Blüm had. They were similar in their beliefs, but actions.
And Enrico Mattei.
And Enrico Mattei, that's again, yeah. But you know, this is, I think,
the anti-colonialists, basically, the people who thought, like, let's not control the world anymore centrally, but let's build something. Ola, can you jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, about what has to be mentioned when it comes to Herrhausen also is the pipelines. Also, the Deutsche Bank was financing the pipeline between West Germany and Soviet Union. That was, the Americans were furious about it. You have a chapter in Peter Schweizer's book on Victory, it's called, and it's about the conflict between Reagan and Helmut Schmidt. And Helmut Schmidt defended the pipelines, and Reagan, they, the Reagan and Caspar Weinberg were Secretary of Defense, and the head of the CIA, Bill Casey, they all wanted to stop the pipelines because that meant that there could be a collaboration between Soviet Union and Europe and West Germany. And that would, of course, this would be a new coal and steel union, or coal and steel community, where you have a dependence, a common dependence from both sides, and that was unacceptable for the Americans, and they tried to bomb it and so on. And Dirk has made a documentary film about it, and so this, but they couldn't stop it because the Soviets just repaired it and so on. So they had to. So this has gone on from 1980 until today,
and this even earlier than that. And there's another thing that's just really important. It's not only a pipeline. It was supposed to be the biggest economic deal of Germany ever. So this was 400 million per year over, I don't know which time frame, but it was a huge amount of money. So the three biggest banks in Germany had to work together under the guidance of Deutsche Bank. And this started in the 70s. Yeah. So this was and Reagan was the one, in a way, like you could say Biden and Trump now, who said, no, it won't happen. We will not allow that. It is a quite complicated situation because, for example, in Europe, also Margaret Thatcher was in favor of that. That was just business for her. She wanted the pipelines for monetary reasons. But so it was a different situation to today. But the same thing was that Reagan sent a crew of diplomats to the Deutsche Bank. That is in a book, not a very famous book, but I found the chapter. There's a whole chapter about it, where the guy who was the second speaker of the Deutsche Bank, besides Herrhausen, until he became the only one, he was responsible for the dealings with Russia, which were not so terribly important at that time, except for this, for the pipeline deal. And they were sent to him, and they told, he said in unfriendly terms, they were not like diplomats, they were like the mafia. That's not his words, but coming, you don't do that. It's clear that you don't do it. Yeah. So he told that, and he tried to explain to the Americans that what the Germans did was not against NATO, it was not against the alliance with the United States. It was business. And he thought that was a good enough reason. But again, as I mentioned in our last conversation with Herrhausen, they didn't understand that these are geopolitical things. And this is, I think, Ulla, you should explain that, because that was striking to me when I first heard that. You are dealing here in areas which are, in reality, life and death decisions for the empires, and you cannot go to court and sue Helmut Schmidt for doing that, or sue Herrhausen for doing that. But you need to have an executive action on these things, and this is what we are looking at with these murders. But you can tell that, Ulla. I'm paraphrasing your thoughts.
It's I mean, the problem with many of these things are that they are not formal deals. Many of these things are actually agreements between individuals on the top level. And if you have this kind of agreement and you don't have a legal way to pursue the person who don't follow the rules, then you only have physical force. So the problem when things, for example, get so secret that many people have told me actually that, I mean, on the top generals and also top political people have told that, when it comes to the very, very secret things, the above top secret, so to speak, you don't write it down on paper, because then you could someone could leak this paper to a journalist. That was what, for example, the former chief of defense in Norway, General Sene Gundersen, said. He was at chief of defense in the 70s and later chairman of NATO military committee. But he said that you cannot have this in a document, because then the document could be leaked to a journalist. So it means that when it comes to the real important things, they only exist as oral information, which means that actually you have to take out people physically. You cannot put them in jail or something like that, because there is they have not breaking any rules. So that is, and yeah.
So we're
continue.
So we're dealing here with an area of high politics, but that then doesn't get written down. It's gentlemen's agreements. And the thing is, these gentlemen's agreements then also have to be carried forward over administrations or whatnot of people who might not be informed of what is. But you need this to hold the structures that are being built. And if they look like crumbling, then the other side that wants them implemented will start taking action one way or another. Is this what's happening? So somebody like Herrhausen or Mattei might not even be part of the deal, but because they are endangering the structure that some people thought they had put in place, they need to be somehow taken out.
And also, one should say that what you had, I mean, the Soviets were not really interested in moving forward their armies in Europe. They have preparations for it, but they were not expansionists in a way. And the Russians are not expansionists in that way. But the problem was that to have a reasonably good defense, you had to have the perception of a threat. So that was what you had in Europe and United States. You had to pretend that the Soviets were more willing to use force than they actually were. That's one thing. But the other thing is that when you start these pipelines and get along with the other side, you could say that, okay, we could get along with them really. It's not, we don't like them privately or whatever, but still, it's economically it functions very well. But that is not enough, because you have to have the perception of a threat. And that was what, when we discussed last time, I think, about the submarines in Swedish waters, that when the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Danes and so on started to talk about a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Scandinavia, the British, you go to the British documents and they say that, we have to speak harsh with the Norwegians. The Norwegians are on a slippery slope, and the Swedes are even worse. We have to change the mentality. And what they did was to go in with small submarines that they anyway used, and then showed up then in Swedish naval bases and archipelagos and so on. And people became crazy.
And scared people to death, right?
Yeah, really. So it was so as we discussed before, it was in Sweden in the 70s up to 1980, it was 25-30% who perceived the Soviet Union as a real threat and kind of enemy and so on. While 3 years later, after the submarine intrusion had started, it was 83%. Just in 3 years, you made Sweden into another country. And that shows how easy it is. You could you could manipulate population very, very easily. And that was perceived, I think, as, if you go to the document, it was, clearly perceived as necessary to have this kind of perception of a Soviet threat.
Yeah, we have that talk within NATO today as well. It's called the necessity of a common threat perception. Everybody needs to understand the enemy in the same way. Dirk, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I have a ton to add, and I fear we overload people with stories. But there's a very first I just looked it up. The deal that Germany wanted to do with Russia was 400 billion marks in 25 years. So you see the scope. You had to do something about it. It boiled down to something like less than a 1/100th of that in the end. But that was American influence. But there's very, very similar to Enrico Mattei. You have this guy who is a fascinating manager, and he comes up and he just does good business. He comes up with good business deals. So if the Americans go to a country to drill for oil at that time, it's a 50-50 agreement. 50% of the revenue go to the oil company, 50% go to the country in which it is, and usually to some corrupt king for himself, not for the population. And Mossadegh was a different story. Yeah? But the Iranian guy was couped by United States and Great Britain because he wanted to distribute the wealth of the oil money as a good Democrat and America lover to his own population. He didn't understand he believed too much in the American Constitution, so to speak. But Mattei now came and said, okay, there are these 50-50 deals, and it means also that the company and the technology and the people come from the United States and they stay there. If you do the deal with me around the Mediterranean, then you get 75%, and we make a joint venture, and we'll train your people. You will be able to do the stuff yourself. Guess who the countries wanted to deal with? So Enrico Mattei, Italy suddenly became a very important country in oil dealings, and Enrico Mattei came up with a the oil platforms in the sea. That was an invention of the Italian company. He started to build tankers to balance the price dealings. So he had always oil in the ocean, so he could bolster the price movements. Yeah, so he was and he was also anti-colonialist. Yeah, so he started to deal with Algeria. He was sympathetic to the Algerian independence movement, which didn't make him friends all around. And it was very strange. There's Aldo Moro and Enrico Mattei. There's a whole doctor's thesis on that Italy became kind of an important power in foreign policy. And then you can see I have secret documents, not any more secret. They were secret at that time, from the CIA and from the British Foreign Ministry. And both say that Enrico Mattei has to be taken care of. 2 days before he dies in a plane accident, there's an article in the Financial Times says, "Will Mr. Mattei have to go?" ? And I have a paper from the CIA where the American mineral oil industry tells the CIA that Enrico Mattei, who just was preparing the biggest deal that ever had been done in Italy, also with the Soviet Union. The biggest deal ever done in the Italian economy. Enrico Mattei is trying to buy oil from the Soviets, and they will get artificial rubber from Italy, and it's huge from the perspective of businessman, a brilliant deal. And both of them, and then the CIA document, the mineral oil, says that Enrico Mattei might be an even bigger villain than the Soviet Union itself. That's the paper. They call him that. So you see, there's this similarity between the pipelines. If you deal with the Soviet Union and you have a big deal, and it looks like a good deal for the economy, and also there are people who try to position, this is what Mattei, to try to position, he was politically active, to Italy as a non-colonial power around the Mediterranean. Then you get into the waters that Ulla just described. You get a laser pointer on your forehead, like Dag Hammarskjöld. He didn't have a laser pointer, but a bullet hole.
So in a sense, what we are looking at here, when we look at all of these political murders and the deaths and the taking out of important figures, what we are looking at is these structures, the ultra-violent structures of the deep empire, right? That keeps stuff together, and that kept especially this transatlantic network that was created after the Second World War, and kind of the way that the empire moved from the UK to the Americans, that kept that structure together, and that managed to get rid of the impediments, right, or the structural problems that might arise on the way. Ola, would you agree?
Yeah, but you should add that they actually brought in the whole Nazi fascist structures into the CIA, and into also to some extent into the British side. But in Italy, you had this conflict with that they recruited the stay-behinds and also part of the police and so on from the old Salò regime, which was what left over from the Mussolini fascist regime. And Scorzeni, as I mentioned before, he was the one who saved the life first of Mussolini, and so it and brought him to Germany, and so it's in 1943, I think. And
Yes.
so it was you recruited all the people, or many people, who was on the very dirty part of the Nazi regime and the fascist regime, and then used them for your own purposes, and this was a kind of a, and so I mean, how the most the one who started the stay-behinds in Ukraine to try to stop the advancing Soviet forces was Scorzeni, and then he became a killer and the weapons dealer also. For the Western, for the US, for the Israelis, and that's and what is and who is using whom is not always perfectly clear. but the document you found in the BND archive, I think, is clear that you have central, or U.S. Air Force, top Air Force people, generals, going to Skorzeny, and you don't go to Skorzeny for the purpose of courtesy. I mean, you go to Skorzeny to have something done, and what they talk about is that Kennedy is impossible to have, and then you could say, you also have in the documents that Skorzeny had close contacts with the OAS, the
Organisation Armee Secret. So
yeah, so that started so wanted to keep
trying to kill de Gaulle. Yeah, the people who tried to kill de Gaulle, who were against Algerian independence.
Yeah. So that was so it means that you have a network of people who were professional killers, and that were introduced into the intelligence system of the Western.
Yeah, I think that is important to understand, and that is something that I consider, if I would give lectures on this would be one of the main important points. There's always there's a quote that I like very much from the director of the movie Carlos, which is a good movie. I can highly recommend to watch that. And he said, in an interview, he said, if you follow the traces of terrorists, you always end at the doors of an intelligence service. And there's a reason for that. The reason is very pragmatic. Imagine, put yourself into the shoes of being an intelligence service. An intelligence service, by definition, is working at the borderline of legal and illegal actions of a state. Its task is to protect the realm, as they say with MI6, and also to enlarge it. But this is how you're judged, if you are effective on that. And then sometimes you have to go aside, and there might be a situation where practical policy decides that you have to kill Olof Palme, you have to kill Mate or somebody else. Then you need people to do that. You don't want to have them directly in your own intelligence services, because then the traces will lead immediately to you. You have entities outside, and this is where terrorists come into place. If you can use them for that, and the smartest way is to make them do what you want without being really in connection with them. And that means they have to be inside these groups. You have to be able to influence, to decide who is killed. Most important question. If you look at Red Army faction, look at who had been killed. Why, for hell's reason, did they kill Herrhausen? Yeah. So why this man? So if you are able to have that, then you have a very effective intelligence service. And then you go to people like Skorzeny. You know that they are fascist, National Socialist murderers, but they are effective murderers, and you have good professionals for that, and then you take them. I have talked to in my whole time about something like more than 200 people from intelligence service, from operations, and so on. And then for example, I had to talk to somebody in an operation in Vietnam, and they used a civilian killer in the Vietnam War to take out a Laotian general. So there you see that if you think in these terms, then the terrorists, or these people, the killers, or people like Skorzeny, they are effective. You can use them. They are in your toolkit. They are maybe one of the most precious things that you have. And if we, the journalists, the scientists, don't talk about that, then our public people in our democracies will never hear about it, because the CIA is an organization that can keep secret whatever it wants to keep secret. Look at Kennedy now, 62 years, 63 years until we get a glimpse of the real things going on. So this is, in a democracy, that's a very, very critical issue. We need to understand that what we do is important, but we are ostracized. We are shoved aside. We are called conspiracy theorists. When we get too close to the real conspiracies, then we are stopped. Yeah, but it
The
is
word-
thought. Yeah.
And the word used is plausible deniability. This is a word that summarizes what you said the last 3-4 minutes, so to speak.
Yes.
It is a, and that was, you know, what the top American people says, you know, when it came to this submarine in Sweden, they used Italian vessels, and I asked why. For plausible deniability. You know, you use someone else.
Of course, this all works together. So if we ask today, why don't we have any European political leader like Olof Palme and Willy Brandt and so on? The one part of the answer is that they were bred out, and the other part of the answer is that they were gone away. I mean, it's the difficult thing is, of course, to understand like what is then accidental or incidental, even on the CIA level. Like, was it just one intelligence agency that said this dude needs to go, or was it more of a network thing? Was there political understanding, and how does that change over time, right? Why is it that people try to get rid of these oil pipelines through political assassinations back in the 80s, but then Nord Stream 1 and 2 were built anyhow, and we know the Americans hated it. We know by now that they were blown up, right? But we know that they hated it, but something changed because Angela Merkel was like left office alive, right? But this is so hard to untangle.
Yeah, and that, and you could say also that, you know, that one British MI6, I had a dinner with a British MI6 officer, and he said that Willy Klaas was impossible to have, you know, from the British side point of view. And
NATO secretary. You have to explain, Ola. Not everybody.
He was a new NATO general secretary of NATO, and the British said that he was impossible to have. Well, he was against the war in Bosnia. He was against the Iraq war, and you know, and then I asked, why didn't you veto him? And he said they have already used up their veto, and then. But after some weeks, the Augusta affair came up, and Willy Klaas has got some bribes in the Augusta, so buying Italian helicopters, and they had to leave as Secretary General of NATO. And of course, that was what the MI6, they followed all the weapons deals because they could see who they could the force to leave because of the weapons deal, you know. So it's pretty clear that, you know, that is what you do. You take them out, and if you are corrupt enough, you don't have to be killed.
So if you don't want to be killed, have a minor corruption affair that can be used. It's a life insurance policy. Yeah.
So in a sense, the entire Epstein saga is actually about life insurances for these people. Anyhow, my friends, I guess this is a good way to end this discussion. Thank you very much, Ola and Dirk, for your time again. I mean, we could barely scratch the surface, of course, but at least we're getting a feeling for what the things that are going on. Ola, I will post the links to your 4-part Olof Palme piece in the description of this video. Dirk, I will post the links to you as well, so people can find you. If you want to share something with our audience, please send it to me, and I will also put it into the links. Okay?
Yes, I have 3 documentaries. I have one on this use. It's called Ready for Service, the use of Nazis and fascists by intelligence services, which is really goes into the stuff that we discussed, but much deeper than you probably have ever seen it, because I also have this Borghese coup in 1970, which hardly anybody knows. Very interesting case. And about the oil pipelines, my last documentary, which it was sent to me in English again. It is out in English as well. I didn't know that. So I'll have some of these. All of them will be in English. You can watch them. Yeah.
Wonderful. Ola, you two send me things if you have them. Okay, I'll share.
Okay.
And thank you very much, Ola.
I highly recommend Ola's 4 pieces. Read them. They're mind-blowing. Really, really good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.